Yes, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, there are mountains and mountains of explanations about the causes and the course of what has come to be called the debt crisis, and I don't propose to add one more. You must have had your fill already. What I want to do instead is to challenge a few of the pieces of received wisdom which this literature conveys. I will do this in a quite unsystematic manner, but you'll forgive me for that. I first want to pick a quarrel with the very word crisis, which, if you reflect, you'll realize that crisis means a turning point, almost a dimensionless element of time. It's a minute in history. It's perhaps a few hours maximum in the course of an illness, during which the organism either goes in the direction of recovery or of death. It's a turning point. It's a turning point in the battle between victory and defeat, but it's very strange that a turning point should have lasted 3 years already. It's still going on. So where are we turning? But I think it's very symptomatic that we call this 3-year period since August 2007, more than 3 years, a crisis, and insist that it still isn't finished. It's very symptomatic of the way in which this whole thing is regarded and treated. And it's just one instance of the general hype. You know the word hype, which surrounds the whole subject. I mean, it started with hype, a relatively minor event, the non-performance of a bunch of mortgages, a bunch of called subprime mortgages, the non-performance or non-payment of a block of maybe 400 or between 400 and 600 billion euros of residential mortgages has set off a cataclysm. But the cataclysm was very largely the product of self-fulfilling prophecies, because you were dealing with a financial system which was fairly modern in the sense that it was a fractional reserve system whose very existence depended on confidence, and the whole press, all the media, a large proportion of politicians, and some of the very highest responsible people from the Director General of the International Monetary Fund downwards, they all worked shoulder to shoulder to magnify the effect of this initial shock, so much so that it ended up as the 3-year or 3.5-year crisis, mainly because the predictions have been all of a self-fulfilling nature. Right. Now, the way this developed was very interesting because it quickly grew a sort of moral arm or moral branch. It was not only a technical problem, not a purely economic problem, it became a moral problem. And the reflection of that was the tremendous echo which manifestations like, or some declarations of the Vatican, and then the Hollywood left, films like Greed is Beautiful, or whatever the title was of this first film of the man Oliver Stone. These manifestations had an echo which passes belief. Everybody was deeply convinced that, of course, they saw it all the time, that greed was bad, and not only did they see that greed was bad, but they saw with shock that a small minority thought that greed was good. And of course it isn't. It has caused this terrible mess. Greed has caused this terrible mess in which we are. Now, greed, in technical language, is called profit maximization. It is less colorful, less loaded with moral meaning, but it's what it is. And profit maximization, of course, is the term for a behavior which minimizes waste and which makes efficient allocation more probable than it would otherwise be. So to say that greed is immoral, it really puts us into a very difficult position, because if we want to be moral, we would have to oppose the means that humanity found for minimizing waste, that is maximizing material welfare, minimizing poverty, minimizing misery, and dealing as economically as possible with the endowment that humanity finds both in itself and in Mother Nature. So that much about greed. And not that this has any particular logical connection with what I am now going to say, but from greed we move to need. They rhyme, and that's about the only relationship between the two words. After the received wisdom, after it has become the received wisdom that greed is bad, and the reasonable capitalist is satisfied with reasonable profit, and the reasonable banker is satisfied with just reasonable interest rates, etc., we have found high authority declaring that the whole financial services industry is has grown well beyond the social need for it. I quote freely extempore from no less a person than Mervyn King, the governor of the Bank of England, who said that the British financial services industry is much larger than what is socially necessary. The same thing was repeated by Adair Turner, the chairman of the Financial Services Authority, the two highest priests of the British official financial establishment. Similar, though perhaps less concentrated, declarations have been heard elsewhere, also in the United States, about the need for there being a Wall Street, which you might as well wipe out of the face of the earth. Now, it's very interesting that the only country that has put into practice the principle that we should produce for need and not for profit, that what should guide us is what is socially useful and not what the caprice of the market demands. The only country that has put this principle into practice, the Soviet Union, has not been very brilliant in the fulfillment of needs. In fact, it was most unbrilliant. And no other country, at least no other significant country, has tried to substitute need for profit in what should guide the allocation of resources. But never mind, this is how it happened. And now this is again a part of received wisdom. We should at least look at social need when deciding on industrial policy, on commercial policy, etc. Once we arrive at this point, once we try and emulate a model like the Soviet Socialist republics, then I would say it's almost all up with us. We are in a very, very bad way indeed. But are we? The story is that we are in a terrible way. We have not at all assured our recovery from the crisis. It's still a crisis. And it has astronomical dimensions. Only last week, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, published their estimate of the total of write-offs and provisions for losses in the world banking system as a result of this famous crisis. And the number is not an immodest one. It's 23 trillion, which is what? Which is about twice the U.S. national debt. It's not very far from the half of total world product. Anyone who has a little bit of plain common sense would regard this number with great suspicion. I mean, how did we really lose from such modest beginnings as the subprime mortgage crisis, the subprime mortgage problem? How did we get from that 400 billion to 23 trillion? I cannot explain it. I doubt it whether any of you can explain it. But there is a strong suspicion of rather unflattering muddle having come into this calculation. Because if it is true that the vicious bankers have transformed the banking system into a gambling casino, if we accept that, then of course we are led to the conclusion that all the losses that people have suffered by participating in the proceedings of this casino, all the losses are precisely offset by gains. Because in the casino, what you lose, either other gamblers gain or the house gains. But in any case, it's a zero-sum game. Whatever the total losses are, they are exactly to the last penny balanced by gains. If bookkeeping of pure financial assets, that is ordinary double entry bookkeeping with assets and assets corresponding to liabilities, if that bookkeeping shows a loss side of 23 trillion, then where is the gain? Where has the money gone? I find this very curious, and it's an interesting research project, which one of you or some of you might like to undertake with proper guidance, not from me, a research project to try and sort out the part in this 23 trillion loss, the part that is just book entries cancelled by other book entries, that is asset write-downs cancelled by reduced liabilities, and what is the proportion that finds its reflection in the real economy. And I guess that the answer would be that the second proportion is not very large. It is probably not half of 23 billion, not a third, but maybe a tenth or less. Well, be this as it may, I propose to you to try and think of these matters by rejecting the received wisdom. Because what we have in reality is a very biased, almost shaded vision. The reality of a financial system or an economic system is that it's a spectrum at one end of which you have the pure free market. At the other end of it, you have the command and control system of economic government. And as you move from the poles, from the outside edges of the spectrum towards the middle, from the free market end, you start getting elements of command and control as you move towards the center. And as you move from the command and control towards the center, you get elements of the free market, as you did in the Soviet Union. Partly black economy and illegal transactions, etc. And we are never at one end or the other end of the spectrum, but always somewhere between the two, maybe at the very middle. We can't really say a priori. But in any case, always what we have, and always what we have had, was a hybrid, and it's still a hybrid. Now, nobody else, except somebody so obsessed as me, will recognize this. People will say, well, the economic system is such and such. There was a great deal of reliance on the market. We have lost that bet. The market has proved a traitor. It is incapable of maintaining equilibrium. It is incapable of regaining equilibrium once it has been moved out of it. Laissez-faire is bad medicine. It's over. Capitalism is over. We have to move resolutely towards command and control. Regulation was insufficient. We have to make it more sufficient. What this means is we are. This doesn't seem to work. Can you hear me? We are somewhere in this hybrid state, somewhere in the middle, and we are all convinced that there's only one way to go. There are not two ways to go. Whereas I would like to drive home the possibility that there are two ways to go, and we had better examine both of them. Maybe the mistake, the problem, is that the free market wasn't free enough, that we should have moved from the given amount of regulation, which has produced this very bad result, towards less regulation, in certain respects, no regulation, rather than with a knee-jerk reaction, yes, more regulation. It wasn't enough. It was insufficient. Let's make more of it. Now, I want to finish, because you must be getting bored with me, but I want to finish with 3 examples where we are now moving towards more regulation or more rigidity, and what I think the practical consequences will be. The first is, I have 3 examples in my head. The first is the saving of Greece. Europe has shown admirable solidarity, although in the very last moment, when Greece was on the point of going under, showed a remarkable solidarity in putting up 115 billion euros of loan money, three-year money, at a very decent rate of interest, in order to keep Greece from defaulting and to keep Greece within the euro system on the assumption, which is totally unexamined, that if Greece collapsed and left the euro and went back to the drachma, then that would have a domino effect on the rest of the weak euro member states. The underlying assumption is fixed exchange rates are good. Having all these countries with fixed exchange rates to each other, that is, all using the same euro, is good. And this has to be saved at great cost in terms of money down the drain, because this 115 billion will, of course, never be repaid. It's just technically impossible. Then the second, so the first example is, let's save fixed exchange rates, because fluctuating exchange rates are disorderly. We need a new monetary order, all fixed exchange rates. The second example is the solvency ratio. You are perhaps aware that after much labor, Basel has brought forth a new set of regulations, including a minimum solvency ratio of 7% of total liabilities for the banks. And in practice, this means that the actual solvency ratio was about 4%, taking good banks with bad, that all these banks will have to somehow get from 4 to 7, that is either double the amount of capital they have, so that with the given balance sheet, the ratio of own capital goes from 4 to 7, or to reduce the balance sheet so that whatever capital they have will amount no longer to 4 but to 7%. And this they have to do over 3 years. Now, this is a beautiful example of how to shoot ourselves in the foot, because if the banks try and get new capital so that they can maintain their actual balance sheet but still get from 4 to 7% of own capital, then they have to siphon capital from the rest of the economy. And governments that are applauding the new Basel III regulations would be desperate to see this happen. This is terrible. We can't allow this. It has to be stopped. The other alternative is the banks reduce their balance sheet. Indeed, what do we see now? We see that there is a credit crunch, that they will not lend or will lend more reluctantly. And we hear, quite rightly, that this behavior of the banks is retarding recovery, prolonging the crisis. But what else can they do? It's one or the other. In either case, the result is very bad for the rest of the economy. It's bad for curing the crisis. But, so we are told, it will make the banking system more secure. But if you have a major movement in a major asset class, such as residential mortgages, which may absorb 40% or more of a bank's total assets, if there is a bubble in residential mortgage in residential house prices, they fall 20%, which is roughly what they have done in most parts of America. Then, of course, whether your own capital was 4% or 7% matters not a bit, because you will be technically insolvent anyway. And the remedy for this is not to go from 4 to 7, but to reform the Financial Accounting Board rules for valuing assets, which at present is that you have to mark assets down to market. All right. I'm becoming a little technical, so I'll stop this point. The last item of formal and informal regulation, which I want to challenge, is the treatment of speculation. Speculation has undermined financial markets. Speculation was terrible. It has destabilized this and destabilized that, and almost drove Greece to bankruptcy. And we were only just in time to stop it from doing further damage. Now, this is totally, utterly, contemptibly ridiculous, because what speculation does is either buys low and then sells high, or it sells high and buys low. In either case, well, the first is the long and the second is the short position. In either case, for it to be successful, it has to have done the purchasing at a low level and the selling at a high level. And by doing so, it will lift the low price from its very low level a little higher, and will depress the high price from its very high level a little lower. In either case, it will reduce the amplitude of fluctuations, which in ordinary English is called stabilizing, but in debt crisis English it's called destabilizing. I don't quite know why. Now, what happened is that Greece arrived at the door, on the threshold of bankruptcy at the very last moment. And it was generally remarked that it was very curious that the markets didn't signal this in advance, or hardly. And I can just very briefly tell you why this happened, for the same reason as what happened to a man who had a dog. And the dog was a faithful guard dog, and whenever anyone passed near the house, the dog barked. And this was very disturbing both for the master and for all the neighbors. So he beat the dog and punished it each time he barked. And finally, the dog learned the lesson. And although he was bred to bark, he no longer barked. And there were the robbers fiddling with the entrance door when people woke up to the fact that the house is going to be robbed. The same way, the speculator is trained. He lives to anticipate. And when something starts to happen, he senses it. If he's a good speculator, he senses it before others, and he starts to bark. That is, when he thinks the price is too high, he sells. And when he thinks the price is too low, he buys. But then he's punished, because this is immoral and destabilizing. So you have prohibitions, you have moral ostracism, you have the whole press, the half of Frau Merkel's government ministers blaming speculation for all the ills, not only of Greece, but the whole Eurozone, and then one ordinance after another forbidding short selling, forbidding this, forbidding that, to the point where there is very little speculation, or in some cases none at all, when there should have been, in the ordinary course of events, quite a lot in advance, giving proper advance warning, and of course reducing the amplitude of the coming fluctuation. And on this cheerful note, I will end by saying that the outlook is very good, except it's made a little less good by our absolute determination to shoot ourselves in the foot on every occasion. Thank you.